Hey there friends and enemies, Joper here again, and today I was finally able to jump into the Elden Ring Nightreign technical test after a ton of issues this morning. I wasn't able to play a single game, but in the second test I had no issues with matchmaking, I didn't get DC'd a single time, and I had a ton of fun. This game blends so many different genres. It does take some time to get used to. I also haven't played Elden Ring in a couple months, so I was very rusty, but I did have fun. And so I want to share some of the things that I learned from my time with Nightreign so far. First off, as you're picking your class, you essentially can start off as one of 4 different characters. You have Wilder, who's the most balanced of the 4. You have Guardian, who's more of a shield tank type of character starting off. You have Duchess, who is a DPS, almost roguelike character. And then you have Recluse, who is more of the mage type. Now, keep in mind a few important things. One, you aren't tied to the playstyle that you start with. So if you want to pick up a different type of weapon, like a big two-hand halberd with Guardian and not use a shield, you can do that. However, it doesn't really play into his kit as well as some other options. So just keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that while you're picking your characters with the matchmaking with randoms, you want to kind of try to balance it out as much as possible in order to have a well-rounded team. Now, there's only 4 different options, so that's not all that difficult, but if you don't have somebody who is playing a little bit more of a tank role, then it can be a bit of a problem if you are getting overwhelmed, especially early on. And so, if you are struggling when you first jump into a match or expedition, as they're called, you definitely want to stick together a little bit more. So when you first start off, you always start the expedition at level 1. And this means that you are incredibly weak. You can die really easily. During the day, it doesn't matter as much because you do respawn, but it does burn a lot of the time that you want to be exploring. So if you stick with a crew until you are high enough level to really go out on your own, it makes things go much faster early on. You can accumulate some of your experience in order to level up that much faster, and it does work really well in my opinion. That's what I would recommend every time you start a game, especially because you don't know the skill levels of your allies as well. So while you may be comfortable jumping off and playing solo, they might be in for a rude awakening as they die over and over again, and this will be really detrimental once you get to the final boss, or any of the bosses for that matter, that are a massive step up in their challenge. And so another thing to remember as you're playing is you want to explore as much as possible as quickly as possible. Once you reach a high enough level, you may not want to bother killing all of the minor ads in the game. Just like in base Elden Ring, you might want to skip some of them as you instead head towards some of the mini bosses, the greater enemies that are going to provide more XP, and also search a lot of the chests that are going to allow you to find upgraded items. Now, I got a +9 death poker early on in the game, like probably my first 5 minutes or so in one of my runs, and I wasn't able to use it. A lot of the weapons have restrictions on what level you have to be in order to use it, but you can keep it in your inventory until you are ready. Another thing to remember, as I mentioned earlier, you aren't tied necessarily to a specific playstyle, but you may want to cover some balance with your characters as well. I was playing as Recluse, and I did not pick up an offhand weapon or a weapon that was going to help me out. So if I ran out of FP, I was really in for a problem because I wasn't able to help the team. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. You always want a backup option that doesn't necessarily use up your FP. Now with the Recluse, once you get used to using her and her ultimate ability and her other abilities as well, you are going to be regenerating your FP a little bit better, but that's another thing to keep in mind as well when you go forward. You're going to want to make sure you have your ultimate abilities and whatever abilities you have on the table ready for the bosses. Now, essentially how it works is there's a circle of flame that is constantly closing. That's the day cycle. Once you get to the end of that and time runs out, that's when you get to the night where you are going to fight a boss. And the boss can be rather difficult. It's not the most challenging boss that you'll ever see in a Souls-like game, but it can be incredibly difficult, especially if you have teammates who are dying, you haven't leveled up enough, or you don't have the proper equipment, you haven't been searching enough to really push your team forward. And so that's an issue that I've seen a couple times where you get essentially skill checked at that boss. Now, once you beat that one, then the day cycle will open up once again. You want to explore as much as possible. You'll have a second boss, and then after you beat that second boss, you will then move on to the final boss. And this is one of those bosses that I think is going to take a lot of people who maybe haven't played Elden Ring in a while or struggle with this type of game. It's going to take them quite some time to beat because it is not an easy challenge. Especially I found out on the Recluse because I was absolutely getting two-shot if I was not careful. So it is rather difficult. It is a massive step up compared to some of the other difficulty of the other bosses in the game that we've seen so far. So definitely something to remember as you're going forward. You want to make sure you're as high a level, but also have the best gear possible so that you can take down this boss ultimately. Other things to keep in mind as you're exploring. You will be able to replenish your flasks consistently during the day. Now you can also heal and get your FP back by going to a site of grace, so those are very nice to have. But one of the major problems that you can run into is that as you get into the night cycle, you don't regenerate your flasks anymore. Same thing in the final boss fight. So you are going to be more judicious with how you use them. Whereas during the day, you can kind of freely heal if you are either able to get to a site of grace or if you just are able to get out of combat for a little bit and allow your flasks to regenerate. So that is also very important to keep in mind, just because it kind of really dictates how aggressive you can actually be. And it kind of leads to a false sense of security from what I've seen, where you're healing up constantly during the day, you're able to stay alive, no problem, beat all these enemies, and then you get to the boss fight at night, and now all of a sudden you're really restricted in how much you can heal, and you have to be very careful about how you use all the items and abilities at your disposal in order to beat that boss. So I definitely recommend mixing and matching, trying all the different characters, seeing how they feel. I might do some general guides or tips and tricks for each of the characters if you guys want to see that. Although it's somewhat difficult to do in such a short amount of time. There's only so much that I'm able to play during these playtests. So definitely let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. We only have a few months till full release, so I'm hoping we get like a full beta as well and some more information about what to expect. I am very curious how they're going to handle the bosses, because it did say online it does look like we will have some DLC bosses eventually as well. And also there is a drop down that allows you to select which of the final bosses that you want to fight. Right now in the technical test there's only one, but I do wonder if when the base game drops there will be some alternative options as well to chase after. So, and if they'll provide different abilities and upgrades. So that's also something I'll talk about in another video. Is the upgrade system is pretty interesting, but it can be a little bit tricky. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Like the video as always. I hope you enjoyed. Comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you all later.